playing hard for the people who sent us here. Let's keep putting hard-working Georgians and our state's success first. Let's avoid distractions and line up together to secure victory. I believe Georgia's success, its prosperity, and its promise for opportunity for all are indeed contagious, and it's our job to keep it that way.
Good evening and welcome to a special one-hour edition of Lawmakers, where we dive deep into the governor's highly anticipated State of the State address. Thank you for joining us. I'm Donna Lowry. Tonight we'll unpack key issues from the message, like the state's response to Hurricane Helene, taxes and the economy, tort reform, public safety, and healthcare initiatives. Stay tuned as we play highlights from the governor's speech and the Democratic response from the Senate Minority Leader. Plus, we'll get analysis from two people who closely follow the Gold Dome and state politics. But first, let's find out what happened under the Gold Dome today from Capitol correspondent Sarah Callis.
Hi, Donna. The House and Senate heard more of Governor Kemp's legislative priorities in his annual State of the State address. The morning started like any other State of the State day, with the House and Senate uniting in the House chamber. Senators and the state Supreme Court justices joined the House members in anticipation of the governor's State of the State. But when one senator was barred from entering, a scuffle outside of the House took a turn.
I represent 200,000 people in Northwest Georgia who duly elected me to be here today.
State Senator Colton Moore was led out of the Capitol in handcuffs after trying to enter the House chamber. Moore was banned from the House chamber by Speaker John Burns last year after making disparaging comments about the late Speaker David Ralston.
I'm going to ask the doorkeeper of this House, Corey Mulkey, no time in the future will the senator from the 53rd be allowed to come into that anteroom or any property of the Georgia House.
The Speaker sent Moore a letter earlier this week reminding him that he is not allowed in the chamber unless he publicly apologizes to Speaker Ralston's family. Moore refused to apologize and said it was his right to be in the House chamber during the address. Moore was arrested and charged with willful obstruction of law enforcement officers. After the drama-filled morning, Governor Brian Kemp carried on with the State of the State address, highlighting tort reform and school safety especially. House Republican leadership said Moore's arrest shouldn't distract from Kemp's speech.
Well, the Speaker of the House has the responsibility of maintaining order and decorum in the House chamber. He's done that here today. This senator caused a very dangerous situation, endangering law enforcement, doorkeepers, staff individuals that were present. I think that the House members who are standing behind me and the members in the chamber were focused on the governor's State of the State address today and the important work to be done this legislative session. And that's really what the focus should be.
Democrats gave their own reactions to Kemp's address and said they need more details on his priorities.
We heard the governor yet again say tort reform is his number one issue. Where are the details? Where's the bill? As both the Democratic chair and our leader has said, we are open to doing business, but Republicans control the entirety of state government, right? And so we are waiting for them to drop a bill, to introduce something in writing for us to start examining and working with our colleagues and our constituents to ensure that we are doing what's in the best interest of Georgians.
Before adjourning in the House, members held a moment of silence for a tragedy in Cobb County.
It is with great sadness that I have to report that yesterday afternoon, a 12-year-old girl shot herself in the girls' room at Lindley Middle School, which is right around the corner from where I live in Mableton. She was taken to Cobb Hospital, and she's currently at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Right now, she's in critical condition.
The lawmakers were also able to take a first look at the governor's budget proposals. They will reconvene tomorrow for Legislative Day 5, and the annual Martin Luther King Day celebration is also expected. That's my Capitol Report. Donna?
Thanks, Sarah. We're going to dig into the governor's speech now, breaking down some of the important topics. I'm happy to have with me two political junkies like me. First, Professor of Political Science at Mercer University, Chris Grant. He is the author of Our Arc of Constancy, a history of the Georgia General Assembly. It's available for free download from the Georgia Humanities Council. And the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's government reporter, Mark Niesse. Mark began with the AJC in 2013 and joined the politics team in 2017. Thank you for joining me today for this full hour. I appreciate it. And you came in from Macon, so I really appreciate it. So thank you.
It's exciting to be in the big city.
Yeah, here we are. Lots happening. This marks the governor's seventh State of the State address. And before we hear a little bit of it, how would you characterize it? Chris, I'm going to start with you.
I oftentimes look for style and whether there's a subtle communication in the speech or something that may be going on that is not necessarily what's in between the lines. I thought he struck a more bipartisan tone than he has in some other speeches. I thought he was certainly reaching out to some Democratic legislators. And I also thought that he was prepping something for his future. He's leaving doors open. And he certainly is touting a record of success in Georgia in this speech that could be used for another kind of campaign.
Yeah, something in the future, higher office. What about you, Mark? What did you think?
Governor Kemp really leaned into his constant refrain of Georgia being the #1 state for business. He talked about the needs of Georgians to continue recovering from hurricanes and storms. He talked about tax relief, and he spent about a third of the speech talking about tort reform, which we'll get into a bit here as well. But that was the prevailing theme, was being really focused on business and the economy.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's hear a little bit about what he had to say from him. The governor declared in his speech, the state is not only strong, but resilient. And he used as an example how Georgians responded to the devastation of Hurricane Helene.
With historic rainfall and mudslides in North Georgia, record flooding in Atlanta with over 11 inches in just 2 days, and a massive amount of damage across much of the southeastern United States. Hundreds of thousands of Georgians across the state were victims of that storm's fury. Georgia Power reported it was the worst storm they've ever seen, with over 11,800 power poles broken, over 5,800 transformers damaged, and over 20,000 people who worked around the clock to restore power. In total, 230 people across the country lost their lives, 34 of them right here in Georgia, including 4 of our children. Marty and I toured 16 of the hardest hit counties in Helene's wake, and in every community we saw utter devastation. But in the face of grief and unbearable loss, we also saw everyday heroes. We saw neighbors helping neighbors, lending a hand or a chainsaw, even when their own home or farm was in need of attention. We saw brand new church outreach programs feeding whole towns. And we saw first responders who put their lives above their own. Will you please join me in applauding their bravery? Courageous men and women like them had to cut people out of their homes and sadly had to recover the bodies of those killed by this storm. The heartbreaking loss of these lives is made even worse by the loss of livelihoods, especially for our farmers and timber growers who have endured over $5.5 billion worth of damage. As you know, our farmers needed relief quickly and efficiently. And that's why we repurposed $100 million to the Georgia Development Authority last November to provide direct financial support for our farmers and timber producers. It's also why, along with our congressional delegation, Lieutenant Governor Jones, Speaker Burns, Commissioner Harper, many of you and many others urged the U.S. Congress and the Biden administration to fast-track block grants to our state. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to every member of Georgia's congressional delegation, both Republicans and Democrats, who voted to support that legislation. I also want to thank both President Biden and President-elect Trump for their support of the disaster relief package as well. Our people will receive the aid they desperately need and deserve, and for that, I am grateful. But rest assured, the elected leaders under this Gold Dome will stand with them for as long as necessary to make sure every Georgian can recover and come back stronger than before.
So he started with Helene, which makes sense, right, Mark? Because the destruction, the recovery, all of it, top of mind with Georgians right now. And really, one of the biggest things to happen last year.
That's right. It was a huge disaster. We're going to continue to see efforts to provide relief to Georgians. And what form that takes remains to be seen. But I think it's likely that we will see efforts to rebuild infrastructure and money in the budget for that. That's roads, bridges, perhaps money for those purposes in different parts of the state. And also, as the governor mentioned, support for farmers and timber farmers whose businesses were damaged. What form that support takes, it always comes down to some sort of loans or money or grants. How that will be done remains to be seen, but certainly that will be a hot topic because everybody wants to help, I think, and there is a strong desire to support those who were most injured.
And he went to the federal government asking for loans for farmers. So that's just the beginning, but we're going to have to see what else happens. Your thoughts on focusing on this topic?
I think throughout the speech, he does some shout outs and some applause to people that are really working very hard. And again, this is kind of a unity speech in some ways that I thought was a nice touch because we've gone through a very partisan cycle, and he's trying to cast, I think, a slightly different tone. Now, there's other parts of the speech where he certainly is going down a partisan path, but I do think in these places where there is commonality and there is some unity, he went out of his way to make sure that he praised both President Biden and President Trump. He made sure that he talked about the entire congressional delegation and made sure that he was pointedly bipartisan in who he was thinking. And it is true. Everybody in the state is committed to seeing recovery from Hurricane Helene. It was a horrible disaster.
Yeah, and when it comes to the people who weren't farmers or the involved in the timber industry, just everyday people suffered.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
I mean, I know my colleagues down at Valdosta State were out for 10 days, unable to go into their offices, no power. They suffered a lot in that storm.
And still suffering, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And everything's not back together. That's right.
Well, let's hear some more. Let's move on to another part of the governor's message where he commits to, once again, providing tax relief.
Between multiple tax rebates, multiple suspensions of the state gas tax over the past 2 years, the homeowner tax relief grant you passed last year, and the largest state income tax cut in history that the members seated here helped us accelerate, we've committed to saving Georgia taxpayers over $7.6 billion. And because of our conservative approach to budgeting and this body's support in holding the line on state spending, along with the incredible economy we've bolstered, we're able to double down on that relief. The prior acceleration you passed last session brought down the Georgia income tax rate to a rate of 5.39%, down a full 36 basis points from where we started in 2022. Today, I'm proposing a further cut of 20 basis points to bring us down to just 5.19%, saving Georgians another $7.5 billion over the next 10 years.
said the state's conservative budgeting puts him in a position to propose yet another tax cut, income tax rate cut. And so certainly not a surprise, though, right?
Right. Well, it's always nice to live in a state or govern in a state that has rising revenues. There's a lot of governors that would love to trade budgets with Governor Kemp because they don't live in states where the revenues have been increasing, and that gives the governor choices. And he's choosing to make the choices in cutting taxes, which is very popular with a lot of people. I think some other people would probably argue that that might be better spent on doing some things like fully funding education formulas or fully funding other areas of the state. We're going through some prison reform in the near future because we've been very, very conservative in our budgeting. And so there's always trade-offs with it, but the governor has chosen to do tax cuts, and that's very popular. And it's popular amongst lawmakers as well.
Yeah, there was a pretty blistering report from the Department of Justice dealing with the prisons in particular. So on some things, he has been conservative, and they're kind of trying to make up for it. But everybody loves a tax cut, right? Everybody wants some kind of rebate.
Sure. So this income tax cut would amount to $1 billion this year and next year. Governor Kemp talked about the long-term impact over $7 billion, which is a lot of money divided among Georgia's, what are we now, about 11 million people. And what's interesting to me is he linked this tax cut to the fight against inflation. He talked about how inflation has hit everybody and Georgians want more money in their pockets to help be able to cope with the rising cost of groceries and other things they see in the store.
Yeah, I think people, that's another, we talk about the pocketbook issues, that he is so good at understanding that this is what people want. And I think, we'll probably maybe see another one next year if this works out. Right now, we're doing pretty well with the budget. There's a surplus.
Again, rising revenues is a great thing for a state. It's what everybody would like to be able to govern in. When you've got more money coming in than you're expecting necessarily, it makes it a lot better than governing in a state that has declining revenues. And Governor Kemp's been very, very good at stewarding that.
Yeah, he has. So let's get to another part, and you referred to it a little bit more meaty, the meat part of the speech, I'm calling it, tort reform. The governor has wanted to tackle this issue for some time, year after year. And he said at the end of last year he was going to get it done this year. The process began in earnest last year, on several fronts.
As we look ahead, I believe one of the biggest threats to Georgia's future is our state's legal environment. Last year, my office worked with the General Assembly and the Insurance Commissioner's Office and John King to pass House Bill 1114. This legislation allowed Commissioner King to gather data and information on Georgia's insurance industry, identify reforms that could be made to stabilize insurance cost, expand choices for consumers when they need coverage, and prevent more insurance carriers from leaving Georgia altogether. The tort reform legislation my office will introduce in the coming days will be comprehensive but fair. Because in Georgia, we believe those who do wrong should be held accountable. And if you have been wrong, you deserve justice. I also believe the legislation we will be introducing can and should have bipartisan support. Making sure your neighborhood has a grocery store with fresh food available to a young single mom or an elderly couple on a fixed income isn't a Republican or a Democrat issue. Recruiting an OB/GYN or a GI doctor to your hometown doesn't depend on what lever you pull in the voting booth. Stabilizing the cost of car insurance and ensuring families have access to affordable housing, it's not partisan, it's common sense. Giving working people and small business owners a chance at the American dream is about who we are as a state, not what political party we support. To my Democratic friends, there is no reason we can't tackle tort reform together. Passing anti-hate crimes legislation, repealing the citizen's arrest statute, and supporting victims of human trafficking. These are all tough issues, but Democrats and Republicans accomplished them together because it was the right thing to do for all Georgians, not just the ones that voted for us. As a former legislator myself, I can promise you that a vote to support the hardworking men and women of our state, a vote to put them first ahead of the status quo, is never a bad vote. But I know this issue is complicated and will not be easy to fix. There are many different stakeholders with competing ideas about how to move forward. However, doing nothing is no longer an option. We will do what is right by the people of our state. We will be fair to all involved in this important debate, and we will work together to pass legislation that strikes the right balance and puts hardworking Georgians first. But also want to be very clear. There's always room for compromise, but there will be no room for excuses, half measures, or failure. Whether it is this legislative session or perhaps a second one later this year, we will achieve meaningful, impactful tort reform.
Now, he came down hard there. He threatened to call a special session if tort reform of some sort isn't passed this session. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, we knew it was coming, but he's determined that we're going to see something, although we didn't get specifics.
That's right. He is making this a key issue for this year's legislative session. As the governor, he can set that agenda. What this is, we hear tort reform. What is tort reform? It means caps on lawsuits. It means the amount of money that victims of injuries, medical malpractice, how much money they can get when they go to court to sue. And what is that limit? How much money can they receive when they are injured, when a jury finds that they deserve compensation? Certainly, we heard from the governor plenty of examples and stories of insurance rates and doctors having to pay a lot of money in medical malpractice insurance. And he described all these costs as job killers, effectively, saying that, you know, it's hard to have a business if you have to pay so much in insurance. What we didn't hear is what I expect to hear a lot of going forward is from the victims and from the trial lawyers, the people who say, well, they deserve compensation. What is the right amount? If you're going to limit their pain and suffering, how much is that really worth in a court of law? If you were injured, how much do you think you would deserve for a severe or debilitating injury? And these are tough conversations, and I think it often gets lost when people talk about tort reform. This is about lawsuits for people who are injured, and how much should they be limited? Certainly, we've all heard about huge awards, and we also have a history in Georgia. In 2010, it went to the Georgia Supreme Court, where there was a cap of $350,000 on pain and suffering, and the Supreme Court unanimously struck that down. Here we are 15 years later trying again.
It's interesting because juries are willing to give these big awards, but yet when it comes to the costs on the other end, they're not happy with insurance going up or some of the other things.
Sure, and we've seen this particularly with healthcare in rural Georgia, where we're seeing fewer and fewer doctors willing to practice with extremely high malpractice insurance rates coming into play. And there's other ways of handling that besides tort reform. I don't want to suggest that that's the only way that you can handle it, but I think tort reform may be a part of that puzzle that has to be discussed. And I think people are genuinely concerned about what's going on with insurance rates. I know personally, and I have teenagers, so my car insurance has gone up significantly, but health insurance has gone up a lot too. And it's cutting into, if you start looking at what your actual disposable income is, for many, many people, it's getting absorbed into costs that are no longer covered by insurance or increased premiums. And it's frustrating to people.
And people think it's just inflation, and they don't realize where it might be coming from. That's being passed along to them.
Sure. And by the same token, if I go in for surgery and the wrong leg gets amputated, which has happened before, I want to be able to get just compensation for it. And I'm not sure $350,000 is enough to say for someone who's now going to spend the rest of their life without legs. And that's a real situation that has had to be addressed in a court of law dealing with the issue of torts. So it's it's not a clear path that says, oh yeah, just fix tort reform and everything will be good. Yes, I'm sure there's lots of plaintiffs' lawyers that would love to see that happen, but trial lawyers fight for people who have really suffered significant loss. And there's some frivolous lawsuits. I'm not going to say that neither exist, they both do.
Yeah, he took time to reach out and have these roundtables across the state to find out what people thought, business leaders and all. Now, he certainly has business with him, even with Waffle House and the different places. So, but I wanted to hear him talk a little bit more about this. He explained how litigation impacts businesses, both big and small, but he really brought it home with Georgians when he talked about the real effects it has on healthcare, and he made it personal and relatable.
We were told story after story of hospitals struggling to recruit and retain doctors, especially OBGYNs and other specialty disciplines, because other states offer stronger protections for healthcare providers, lower insurance rates, and a more level playing field in their courtrooms. And we've heard from multiple doctors who wondered how much longer they're going to be able to practice for fear of being targeted by baseless or excessive lawsuits. These stories highlight a legal environment that leads to fewer options for Georgians seeking care, higher cost, and ultimately worse health outcomes for our people.
Yeah, that last line, fewer options for Georgians seeking care, higher costs, ultimately worse health outcomes for our people. I think that's what really resonates with people, don't you think?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we're paying more and getting less is what he's saying. And I think a lot of us feel that. I mean, I think we do. We feel on a day-to-day basis we're paying more and we're not getting as good of coverage as we had 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, and we don't have the number of doctors, not just in the rural areas, but overall, you're not graduating from medical school as many people, that kind of thing. So it's really is a problem. That medical malpractice insurance is a big issue with a lot of people in medicine.
It's so expensive, not just for doctors, but of course it trickles down to all of us in how much we have to pay, not just in health insurance, but those co-pays and out-of-pocket expenses are there. It's interesting how this contrasts with the Democrats' position. You know, Governor Kemp here is talking about tort reform as a key component of improving the cost of health care. Democrats in Georgia, we've heard for years, have consistently argued for expanding Medicaid as a remedy not just for lower costs and making health care more affordable for Georgians, but also to expand health coverage and improve quality of life. So we have a contrast in views about the solution for how our health insurance coverage and health treatment should be handled.
It's going to be interesting to see how these arguments play out, and then we'll keep up with that. Let's turn on to another issue. The governor's next top issue, public safety. It began with honoring law enforcement for their bravery and specifically the school resource officers at Appalachia High School.
Last year, when a deranged gunman attacked one of our schools, a place that should be safe for everyone, 2 on-site officers confronted and arrested him within 2 minutes, while numerous local and state law enforcement rushed to the scene, including Sheriff Judge Smith. Those 2 school resource officers saved many lives at Appalachia High School on that horrific day and have more than earned our gratitude. Sergeant Chase Boyd, Deputy Brandon King, and Sheriff Smith are here with us today. I'd like to ask them to stand and let us thank them and their colleagues for their heroic efforts. In total, we have allocated $294 million for campus safety so far, and my budget proposal includes a further $159 million for that purpose. And just as we're protecting Georgia's children in our classroom, we're also going after those who target them outside of school, including gangs and human traffickers. Thanks to the vital work of the members of the Grace Commission law enforcement partners, including the GBI's Human Trafficking Exploitation Unit, and prosecutors on the state and local levels, all championed by the nation's best First Lady, Marty Kemp. The state now The state has now investigated over 330 human trafficking cases, convicted 49 human traffickers, and saved roughly 200 lives. I want to thank Attorney General Chris Carr and the Human Trafficking Prosecution Unit, led by Hannah Palmquist, for all that they have done to help make Georgia a safe place for victims and a hostile state for the perpetrators. The Attorney General's office has also investigated 140 gang-related cases, securing 52 convictions and charged more than 140 individuals. And that's just since the unit was stood up less than 2 years ago. My budget includes just over $1.2 million to expand the gang and human trafficking prosecution units in the Attorney General's office to further this good work. Also, Marty will spearhead the passage of her 10th human trafficking bill that will reinforce the good work of the Grace Commission. Their resilience in fighting this good fight is why Georgia is leading on this issue, and this latest measure will be yet another reminder that if you come after our children, we are coming after you.
Strong language there, punctuating at the end with, if you come after our children, we'll come after you. Certainly feeding into the fear that people have. They want solutions on this.
Sure. I mean, I talked to my two daughters going to high school in this fall about what to do if they find out a shooter's in the school. I mean, parents have been having those conversations this year because it's real. And I think that's great to do more school safety. Metal detectors are going up, and that's a good thing. But we're still not addressing, and I'm all for the First Lady's human trafficking work. It's important, it's meaningful, it is serious work to do, and I applaud her for it. But we're still not addressing anything to do with the supply of guns. And I think that this is an issue where, yeah, there's two sides to it, and we definitely need to talk about having more school safety, and we need resource officers who do a noble job every day and put their lives on the line for our kids. But we also got to talk about, how did that boy get that gun into that school? There's a real question there. And how did he get the gun? Well, Dad gave him the gun, but we want to know some things on that end too.
Yeah, I think the Democrats definitely want to talk about it, and we'll hear them talk a little bit about that later. But next, let's hear the governor talk about health care, physical and mental health.
Mental health services like this are improving the quality of health care and access in our state, as is the newly launched state-based exchange, which is the latest milestone on the plan we laid out in the Patients First Act of 2019. These ongoing efforts are lowering the cost of premiums and increasing the number of those insured in Georgia. In fact, since I took office, the combined work of Georgia Access and Georgia Pathways is covering over 1.5 million people across our state. I will continue to repeat this until I'm blue in the face, even though many on the other side or in the media do not want to hear it. We are covering well over 200,000 more Georgians than traditional Medicaid expansion would cover. And those And it's important to remember, those Georgians are on better plans that deliver better coverage and lead to better health outcomes for them and their families. In fact, since I've taken office, we've seen over 93 provider rate increases through traditional Medicaid, and costs to the state have grown by more than $250 million per year. So when you hear someone say that fully expanding traditional Medicaid is fiscally responsible, know that they are selling you a bill of goods, because the numbers simply don't match the rhetoric. In total, Georgia spends over $4.2 billion for Medicaid in our state. And there are those who say the program only needs more money to succeed. Well, I respectfully disagree. With the new administration coming to Washington, I'm looking forward to furthering our innovative approach to health care access, which is making Georgia a leader in this field. And as I announced yesterday alongside Lieutenant Governor Jones and Speaker Burns, we're making it even easier to sign up for the Georgia Pathways program that helps Georgians start a rewarding career, get a degree, attain real-world skills, and ultimately receive better health care coverage.
Now, with this, he reiterated a lot of what he announced in his press conference yesterday, so that wasn't new. He's definitely standing firm on that he does not want to expand Medicaid. It's not going to happen under his watch.
That's right. He keeps making that clear, that Medicaid expansion, Medicaid is health insurance for people with low incomes, generally speaking. And Governor Kemp is dug in on his plan of Georgia Pathways, which so far has not enrolled too many people. Although Governor Kemp and his administration says give it time, they're working on it, and these things are being rolled out, and he believes that this plan and this strategy will be effective in the long run, especially considering that President-elect Trump is coming into office, and who knows what will happen to the federal spigot of money for programs such as Medicaid. So what the governor is doing is he is being very clear that Medicaid expansion is not something that he will accept this session, even though in recent years there has been tiny movement and a little bit of growing acceptance of expanding Medicaid services. It does not look like that is going to be on the table this year.
Yes, certainly he has done it in the maternal health care area, and just a little bit, but not a lot. And he's not hearing it.
and I'm interested in when the data is really showing up for Georgia Pathways. If it is superior to Medicaid expansion, more power to him. However, if we look at healthcare cost, one of the big drivers of healthcare cost is uninsured individuals. And that's driving cost up because hospitals aren't able to recoup those costs. And that means the insured have to pay more in order to cover those costs. So getting more people in insurance is the key to driving down the market for healthcare coverage.
Okay, we'll see. He ended his speech with, of course, a football reference. He's done that in the past. He quoted his football coach, he says, winning is contagious. And he said, despite unprecedented challenges that Georgia has enjoyed historic success. So final thoughts, anything as we wrap up on this?
Sure. With the football analogy at the beginning of his speech, he talked about Georgia being resilient. We also remember Georgia coach Kirby Smart talking about how Georgia is resilient and on the football field. And I think we are seeing that framing, that theme continuing of Georgia coming back from disasters and emerging victorious.
Next year, huh? All righty.
That's right.
All right. Stay with me, because coming up, we'll hear from the other side of the aisle with the Democratic response to the state of the state when this special 1 hour Lawmakers continues.
Georgia Farm Bureau, a grassroots organization dedicated to preserving Georgia agriculture. Farm Bureau advocates for all Georgia farmers at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
It's good to have everyone back together.
Good news indeed.
Put your feet up a minute.
It's beautiful.
How does that sound to you, man?
It's what I love doing.
Cup of tea.
I was thinking more double whiskey.
Hurry up! Freshly baked biscuits, always.
Well, this is all proving rather cozy, isn't it?
Understanding the past gives a sense of the future. This is the first time that anyone has seen this in 2,000 years.
This is amazing.
Well, I'm excited now. Pompeii is a battle against time.
You think I'm joking, but look at this. It did really happen.
Don't let anybody tell you who you are.
History teaches us to honor the past.
When you look back, you're like, wow, that was pretty special.
This is something that's actually altering the course of history.
You're charged with keeping these stories alive.
Welcome back to Lawmakers. I'm Donna Lowry. I'm pleased to have here for analysis the AJC's government reporter Mark Niesse and Mercer University professor Chris Grant. Thanks for sticking around. We heard Governor Kemp talk about a number of issues, including tort reform and public safety. Now, the Democratic response to the state of the state. Senate Minority Leader Harold Jones II begins on a personal note.
My fellow Georgians, I'm Harold Jones, the Democratic Senate Minority Leader in the Georgia State Senate. I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, but raised in Augusta, Georgia, home of Fort Eisenhower and the godfather of soul, James Brown. Like most Georgians, I come from a middle and working class family. My father was in the Air Force, and my mother was a teacher. Tonight, I am honored to speak with you about how we can make Georgia work for everyone, and not just the few. As the minority leader, along with the Senate and House Democrats, I understand it is our job to fight for middle and working class families. So let's take a few minutes and talk about Georgia. Unfortunately, under this administration, two Georgias have emerged. There is a Republican Georgia, which has only valued corporate interests and profits. And there is a Georgia where hardworking people work 2 and 3 jobs, but still struggle to pay their bills, afford good housing, afford better medical care, or take care of their family members in their time of need. And many of our fellow citizens are one financial emergency away from ruin. See, there are families all across Georgia, from Dalton to Valdosta, Columbus to Savannah, or Augusta to Atlanta, who face difficult economic choices. Tonight, there are mothers and fathers who are burdened because of childcare costs. Tonight, all over this state, there are Georgians who cannot afford to buy a home because of rising housing costs. And those who are in apartments could face eviction because of skyrocketing rental costs. Tonight, there are over 500,000 hardworking, uninsured Georgians who cannot afford good medical care. Georgians face real problems that deserve real solutions. Unfortunately, this administration and Republicans in the General Assembly have not given us any solutions. You see, to them, the only thing that matters is Georgia's the #1 state to do business. And we should be proud of that achievement. But what the administration and Republicans fail to realize is that Georgians dream bigger than that. Republicans and the governor fail to understand how to value people, not just profits. Georgians want a state where we're the #1 state for public education. We're the #1 state for health care. The #1 state to afford a home, and above all, be the #1 state to raise a family. Georgians have that vision, and it is a vision I have, and so do Democrats in the Senate, the House, and the Democratic Party. Now, some will say we cannot achieve that vision. They will point to the fact that the governor refuses to close the health care coverage gap and allow hardworking Georgians access to health care. They will point to the fact that this administration's refusal to expand health care means 500,000 Georgians will go without health care. It will cause rural hospitals to close and medical professionals to leave the state. Some will say the vision cannot be obtained because they see that child care costs are rising above the national average, that housing costs continue to rise, and they just do not see on the agenda that people matter over politics. I would say you're looking at the wrong agenda. The Democratic Senate agenda is simple. People matter, you matter, and your family matters. Governor Kemp's agenda does not work for families. Our agenda does. We don't want you to have to choose between working and providing child care for your children. We propose policies to meet this challenge. We want to increase CAPS eligibility. We want to use a portion of that $16 billion surplus that the governor currently sits on. Republicans want to use that money to help corporations. We want to use that money to help you. Real investment in our child care system will achieve the vision to make Georgia the best place to raise a family. We believe affordable housing is important. It is an investment in you, an investment in our workforce, and above all, an investment in our communities. We can achieve this vision by reducing barriers to building housing and providing incentives for investment in workforce and middle-class housing. Unlike this administration, we look at housing as a way to invest and improve our community, not as a way to allow corporate landlords to drive up the cost of your rent and mortgage. We understand that healthcare is not a handout. It is a necessity to living a vibrant and productive life. Because it is a necessity Georgians deserve the peace of mind that quality, affordable healthcare coverage brings, no matter their zip code. And this burden of medical debt that so many Georgians have or fear having is not right, and it can be eliminated. But the governor will not give up on his Pathways program. This program has only been a pathway to failure, a pathway to more medical debt, a pathway to deprive Georgians access to health care and improving the healthcare system overall. Why Republicans refuse to move on Pathways is beyond comprehension. It is time to end this failed and costly Pathways program and give Georgians real access to health care and save the healthcare system in Georgia. And more than that, Governor Kemp and Republicans will increase insurance premiums of millions of Georgians by 85% if they get rid of President Biden's tax credits for the ACA premiums. We must take action to stop Georgians from facing premium increases of almost $17,000 a year. The Georgia Senate Democrats believe making Georgia the #1 state is achieved through good public education. And it can work in every community, no matter their zip code or income. It is clear the Republicans and this administration do not believe in public education. They've consistently underfunded public education. Worst of all, last year Republicans passed legislation to allow your tax dollars to be used to pay for profit private schools. This legislation will decimate rural education and cripple our education system for decades. We and you want our state dollars to go to public education. We want to invest in the future of Georgia by investing and promoting good public schools, instead of creating ways to fund private corporations to deliver poor private education. This administration should invest in our public schools, improve public education, and improve our communities and our children's lives. We cannot be the #1 place for families if we do not protect our families, and public safety is always paramount to the Georgia Senate Democratic Caucus. As a former prosecutor, I understand that we must punish criminals and protect the innocent where necessary. Where necessary, we support strong, common sense anti-gang legislation and legislation that protects the public from criminals. But we also must protect our children and families from gun violence. That is why we have proposed common sense gun legislation, red flag laws, laws to take guns away from domestic violence abusers. Yet this administration and the Republicans refuse to promote good legislation that will protect our families from gun violence. Lastly, when we talk about being the #1 state for families, we must recognize that all people must be treated fairly. We will continue to promote and fight for a woman's decision about her body and reproductive choice. And we will protect the humanity of all of our citizens. And we will not allow cultural war issues to distract us from our vision. Our vision is clear. Under our leadership, there will be no longer two Georgias. We will be one Georgia. One Georgia that is based on family, community, faith, love, and a desire to do what is right for every citizen. And above all, we always put you, your family, and your community over corporate profits. Let's continue this journey together, knowing that our vision will occur and Georgia will be the #1 state for families in the greatest nation on earth. Thank you. God bless Georgia, and God bless the United States of America.
So the Democratic response certainly different from the state of the state and into some issues that the governor did not get into, including education and abortion, that kind of thing.
That's right. It's a real difference in vision. We heard Governor Kemp talk a lot about cutting taxes, about keeping Georgia a strong state for business, about reducing costs caused by inflation. What we heard from Senate Minority Leader Harold Jones was talking about health care, talking about education, talking about affordable housing. So those are not the same things that Governor Kemp was focused on. And this is a decision for, well, voters made that decision in November to some extent when they voted in our senators and representatives for new 2-year terms. But this is the contrast that always exists in Georgia and between the two political parties, where which of these issues are most important to voters? Where do they stand?
Were you surprised the governor didn't talk about education?
I was surprised we didn't get more details. He talked a little bit about school resource officers and school safety, but what does that look like? What bills will we see this session? Are we going to see something, the easiest thing, or perhaps the most talked about thing, would be something to do with gun safes, right? There's been talk about tax credits for purchasing gun safes. We've heard of Democrats wanting much more than that, but even giving money back to gun owners if they store their guns safely seems like it could have some bipartisan support.
Yeah. We didn't hear anything about teacher pay raises that we've heard from him in the past. Your overall thoughts?
I'm struck by the fact that when we were talking about the increased revenues the state has, which is good, and what do you do with the money? Do you give tax cuts, which has a lot of people supporting it? Or do you improve education, or do you do child care benefits, or do you healthcare expansion, or what do you do with this money, this resource? And we're limited by the amount of money that's there, and we have some real catastrophes that have to be dealt with. But there's a choice that every government has to make about those things. You don't get everything. You have to choose between them. I think the Democrats have a different vision of what to do with that money. But if you want to create a state that's number one for business, you're also going to create a state that has higher child care costs, higher rent costs, higher costs for a lot of things that people are looking at. You don't get one without the other. And so you have to make choices about how you're going to administrate the money. And I'm not saying at this moment that I think, tax cuts are a terrible idea. I just think that people don't always get the choice that has to be made in what that means and what it means to individuals. And I like paying less taxes, so I'm good about that.
So the tough part for the Democrats is it is a Republican-controlled legislature. I mean, the state overall. And they're really fighting an uphill battle for some of their priorities.
Sure. Ultimately, Republicans have the votes in Georgia in both the House and the Senate, but that doesn't mean Democrats are powerless, right? There are areas for bipartisan agreement. There are also areas where Democrats can potentially stand in the way, including Governor Kemp's #1 priority, tort reform. Right? That is not necessarily a Democrat or Republican issue. We will see the details of it, but where will that come down? I wouldn't be at all surprised if it does need some Democratic help to some extent to make it happen.
You may want it to be so that it does have bipartisan support, so that it looks good to everybody. So it's easier to sell to everybody a little bit.
Sure, and the days of the supermajority are over for the Republicans. They're 10 votes that they can hold. If they lose 10 votes, they can go down. They can lose a vote. They have a 10-vote advantage, 100 to 180 in the House, and 23-33 in the Senate, right? Yeah.
23.
So 5 votes in the Senate, 10 votes in the House, you lose. Republicans have not always been able to hold their party together. They have some members that have deviated from the script that they've been given by the leadership. It was certainly something that the last speaker had to deal with on a number of cases, and he looked to getting Democrats to fill in the ranks when he couldn't get his own caucus together. So the idea that you can just say, Republicans hold the majority and they can put everything through. Yes, they have a majority and they have an advantage. And I think anybody would rather be in their seat than the Democrat seat. But it has not always led to overwhelming support and easy ride for legislation from the governor.
Yeah, it struck me that Leader Jones's tone was more, getting to the heartstrings rather than we're, just really hammering something home. And maybe that's the best way to get people to understand their position on things.
Right. Are you going to appeal to the pocketbook issues, or are you going to appeal to the needs of what people might feel in their specific situations, healthcare, education, most importantly? On the other hand, the economy consistently ranks as the #1 issue among voters in Atlanta Journal-Constitution surveys, including this week's, right? It's still the #1 issue. So where do the people of Georgia really land? What is most important for them? I think most of them, it's a very healthy mix.
So a mix of different things. And anything else you want to point out about your survey while you're here?
Well, there's tons there on transgender sports, on popularity of the governor and other politicians in the state. We might have upcoming coverage on guns and gun rights and the economy as well.
Okay, we're going to take a look. Thank you both for being here. That does it for Lawmakers today. We thank you so much for joining us. Have a good evening.